You know what's fascinating? According to research, our brain forgets almost 70% of what we learn in just 24 hours. 70%. Imagine that most of what you studied today, by tomorrow, it's gone. And if a whole week passes, well, the numbers drop even lower. Sometimes only 5% remains, or maybe you don't remember anything at all. Doesn't that feel crazy? It's like you've spent so much time and energy pouring water into a bucket, only to realize the bucket has a hole in it. Everything leaks out, leaving you frustrated, unmotivated, and eventually blaming yourself, thinking you're just not smart enough. But let me tell you, it's not your fault. It's not that your brain is weak or your memory is broken. The real reason is this: most of us have been learning in the wrong way. Without realizing it, we've been using the most inefficient strategy for how the brain actually works. Because the truth is, thinking isn't just one flat process, it happens in levels. Each level gives us a different result. And unfortunately, most of us were trained to think only at the lowest level, the shallowest way of using our mind. That's why today, I want to walk with you through the 6 levels of human thinking. Think of it as a roadmap, a way to check where your own thinking currently stands and how far you can go. In a world of education, there's a framework called Bloom's Taxonomy. Picture a staircase, where each step represents a different stage of thinking. The lowest step is the most basic form, while each higher step brings you deeper and more complex levels of understanding. This framework was first introduced in 1956 by an educational psychologist named Benjamin Bloom. At that time, he and his colleagues were frustrated by the way schools measured intelligence. Most tests only focused on one skill: memorization. Students were considered smart if they could repeat information from textbooks word for word. But Bloom realized something important: memorization alone doesn't prepare people for real life. He believed education should do more. It should help us develop intellectual abilities like analyzing arguments, solving complex problems, and making wise judgments. That's why Bloom and his team created this classification of thinking levels. Some people dismiss it, saying it's only useful for teachers or curriculum planners. But honestly, that's a narrow view. If you understand these levels, it's a total game changer. Because once you know them, you can recognize where you are and see how much further you can grow. So let's go step by step. The very first level is remembering. This is where you're simply recalling information. Maybe you're memorizing historical dates, the size of a soccer field, or the height of a monument. At this stage, you're just spitting out facts. The irony is that even though it's called remembering, it's actually the easiest type of knowledge to forget. Memorization alone doesn't go deep enough. That's why many students feel learning is boring. It feels like endless repetition with no meaning. This is why so many people think of school as suffering instead of something exciting. Now let's move up one step to understanding. At this level, you're no longer just memorizing, you're trying to truly grasp the meaning. You can explain things in your own words. For example, instead of just listing the dates of World War II, you can explain the causes, the background, and the consequences. When you reach understanding, your memory automatically becomes stronger because your brain has processed the information more deeply. The third level is applying. If understanding is about knowing what, applying is about knowing how. Here, you take knowledge and put it into action. For example, an engineering student using physics formulas to calculate the strength of a bridge. Or think about students doing community service projects, using their classroom knowledge to solve real-life problems. If you've reached this stage, you should feel proud because many people know things in theory but completely freeze when it comes to practice. The fourth level is analyzing. This is where critical thinking really begins. You break down information, search for patterns, and connect the dots. You think like a detective, digging deeper, examining evidence, and uncovering hidden motives. For instance, analyzing why inflation happens, how it connects to interest rates, and what it means for people's daily lives. Someone at this stage doesn't just accept information at face value. They connect the pieces and see the bigger picture. The fifth level is evaluating. Here, you don't just analyze, you make judgments. You weigh options, justify your decisions, and defend your choices with solid evidence. Think about writing a thesis. You don't just gather theories. You analyze data, draw conclusions, and defend your findings. Or think about voting for a leader. Ideally, this requires evaluation. You shouldn't just pick the most popular candidate. You should examine their track record, their programs, and their integrity. Sadly, many societies are still stuck at level 1, which is why democracy often gives us disappointing leaders. Finally, we reach the top, creating. This is the highest level of thinking. At this stage, you're no longer just consuming or analyzing knowledge. You're producing something new. You're combining ideas to create original solutions, theories, or products. For example, PhD students aren't allowed to just repeat old research. They must contribute something new, something original, to the world of knowledge. This is the level of innovators, researchers, and creators. And while not everyone needs to reach level 6, even getting to level 5 is already an incredible achievement. Of course, Bloom's taxonomy isn't perfect. Critics argue that it's too rigid and too linear because in real life, thinking doesn't always follow neat steps. Sometimes creativity strikes intuitively without going through every stage. But still, this framework is extremely valuable because it reminds us that learning isn't just about memorization. It shows us that intelligence is not about being smart or not smart, but about knowing which level of thinking you're at and pushing yourself to climb higher. So, let me ask you, after hearing all this, what level of thinking do you think you're currently on? Are you still stuck at remembering, or have you begun analyzing, evaluating, maybe even creating? Because in the end, Bloom's taxonomy is like a map. It shows you where you are right now, it shows you what's possible, and it gives you the steps to get there. And the choice to climb higher, that's always in your hands.